Good evening and welcome to the Late Debate on a night of European debates here on ITV. Tonight, a little later than usual, we're going to be talking to two London leading MPs, passionate advocates on either side of the Leave or Remain divide. And we'll also be asking, why does the capital appear to be so far out of step with the rest of the country when it comes to Europe? But first, let's get down to the debate with the International Development Secretary and Putney MP Justine Greening for the Remain side, and opposing her, the Vauxhall Labour MP Kate Hoey for the Leave campaign. Justine, first of all, you just stepped off a plane from Pakistan. Are you just disheartened by the fact that while you're away, the polls have moved, Leave appears to be gaining ground, is certainly taking more bets?
Well, I think the most important thing is that we're having this debate and this referendum in the first place. As the polls show, this is a real discussion for the UK public to have about what our future should be, whether we stay in Europe, which I think is good for jobs and good for UK influence, or whether we leave. Now, we've got 2 weeks left, but this is going to be the most... I think that people are going to take a decision to do what's in the UK interest in terms of jobs and in terms of influence and stay in. But the most important thing is that this is a debate that everyone's got to be in and everyone has to have their vote. That's why it's so important that anyone watching this tonight still has probably about an hour and a bit maybe to register, but people have to get registered.
You signed up to that campaign to get people to register.
I do think I mean, I've wanted a referendum on this for years, pretty much a lone voice, but then joined by others, and I'm delighted that we get a huge numbers of extra people turning out to vote, and then actually
you happy
on the
with
register.
The extension to the register?
Oh, well, it had to happen. Yeah. I really don't think it should have been 2 days, but I definitely had to happen because there were people who were so frustrated, and I met some of them, and I think that's really important. And I think I agree with Justine. You know, this is a huge opportunity for people. For 41 years, they've seen the European Union change, treaty. Nobody's ever been asked. Now they're being asked. We've only got one vote each, so MPs really are not that... We're important, but we're not as important as the public out there.
How much of a blow was it to Leave today to hear from Sarah Wollaston, the independently minded Tory MP, that she's jumped ship to Remain?
Yeah, well, it was no more than we heard of another Tory MP who's kind of had gone the other way. You know, I don't think...
But she had some pretty damning things to say about your £350 million of spending on the NHS.
To be fair to her, when she was actually being interviewed, she then pointed out how she didn't believe a lot of the things that the Remain side were saying. So, you know, I've said from the beginning too that clearly in a campaign like this, and it happens in general elections as well, people sometimes exaggerate or do things that really they shouldn't have done. I'm very, very keen to get a real, genuine debate as much as possible at facts. Of course, it wasn't helped by David Cameron allowing government money to be spent on putting out a leaflet that was really biased, and he should not have done that.
Justine, respond to that.
I don't agree. I think in referendums in the past, government has put out information for people. One of the biggest points of this debate is that people have said they want more information. That's what this leaflet was doing. And in the end, people are about to have their say on probably the most important question that can be facing our country, which is our continued membership of the European Union. And I think for Londoners, with the City of London at stake and with the London economy at stake, actually there's never been a more important time for people to make sure that they protect that advantage that we've got, not just being Europe's financial capital, but the world's financial capital, but also protecting the influence that we've got. And this is a young capital, lots of young people. It's making sure that their voice is still going to be heard around the European Union table of the future.
Well, I mean, first of all, Harold Wilson back in 1975 put out both sides, and he was a stay-inner, but he gave the other side the right to have the same money spent on them. As far as being isolated if we were to leave, it's just such nonsense. You know, we are the 5th largest economy. We're a huge country. Why is the government always playing the country down as if we couldn't possibly cope, trade, become like all those other democratic countries in the world that are not in the EU? They manage to trade, they manage to control their own borders, they manage to do all these things. Why is it that the United Kingdom cannot?
Justine, just one thing. Even Sadiq Khan said today the world won't come to an end if we leave.
Well, I think like lots of people, I've weighed up all of the pros and cons. And there are pros and cons on each side, and I think it is important that we have a measured debate. But I very firmly, in the end, came down on the side of staying. And I think the reality is that all of the independent economic analysis is very, very clear that we're better off staying in. That makes sense because we're currently
is it very, very clear, or is it more a case that we don't know what will happen?
Clear.
The reality is nobody knows exactly about what would happen if we leave in terms of certainty, but nobody knows what's going to happen to the European Union in the next 3 months, never near 3 years.
But you accept it's a leap into the dark to leave?
I don't use the word leap into a dark, because the thing that is certain if we leave is that we then, as a country and as a government and as politicians, control the destiny of our country. And when people vote us in, they can then vote us out, which they can't do at the moment with the people in the European Union Commission. So I really think this isolationist scare thing is just so...
So is it all about sovereignty for you?
Underpinning all of it is, to me, about democracy. That was what Tony Benn, Barbara Castle, Peter Shore, those genuine stalwarts of the Labour movement warned when we joined the Common Market.
Project Fear.
I just want to come back to
failed?
two really important points here. First of all, it is important that we stay inside the single market for jobs. We know that it will be a short-term economic shock and a long-term loss of jobs if we leave. That's precisely why Brexit is saying it needs to do a trade deal. The point is the deal we've got is good. So we would be mad to walk away from it. Secondly, on influence, the bottom line is that Europe is our continent. That's not an option. It's a geographical fact.
We're not leaving Europe.
What happens in Europe and what is decided by the European
56.
What's decided by the European Union does affect us. So our voice counts and should be around the table, shaping the decisions that will continue to be taken by the European Union.
Well, Justine, I would agree with you about our voice.
So it's a weird concept of sovereignty that leaves us a step away from decisions that affect us.
We have no real say, Justine, and you know that all the reforms... There was David Cameron with a referendum hovering, and he could not get anything serious back. He didn't even ask about getting our common fisheries policy back. He didn't ask about changing the common agricultural policy. He got no powers back to our country. And that was with the threat of a referendum. So if we vote to remain in future, if we want any changes, anything tiny, the European Union commissioners will say, your country loves the European Union.
The difference is, Kate, is that the Prime Minister got a deal and we know exactly what that is. You
it's
might not think it's
Justine,
good enough,
let's
but
talk
you
about
know
the deal.
what it is.
It's not in a treaty.
We do not know
it's not
what
in a treaty.
leaving
Justine,
the
you
European
sit around the
Union
cabinet table,
would
you
look
talk
like.
to the
It's not
Prime
in a
Minister,
treaty.
you move in international circles, you scrutinised that deal that David Cameron brought back. What in particular sells it to you?
It's the fact that we get the best of both worlds. We can stay in the single market, but we're not part of the Eurozone. We're not going to be part of the Schengen area, and those advantages are protected.
What's new in this deal?
But the point is, Kate, that I know what the deal is staying in the EU. Nobody knows what will happen if we leave. Brexit have never been clear on that. All the economic analysis suggests it will cost hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Well, now that is a real scare story, and all these economists that you're talking about, and all these big institutions,
to our economy.
Justine, well, you know exactly we're the same institutions, and the people like Peter Mandelson's and the people on Kenneth Clark's who said if we didn't join the single currency, the country would be finished. They were wrong then; they're wrong now.
You're like somebody trying to sell a mortgage who won't tell you what the interest rate's going to be, won't tell you who the mortgage provider's going to be. Won't tell you what the details of your mortgage are going to be. I wouldn't even risk my mortgage on that, and my house, let alone my country.
The Treasury can't even forecast and get it right what's going to happen 3 months ahead. It is complete nonsense.
Kate, I'm sure you've probably been called many things in your time, but probably not a dodgy mortgage broker before. Can I just put to you that there was quite a salvo from your Labour colleagues today. Yvette Cooper, Harriet Harman, Sadiq Khan, Alan Johnson, all saying Labour's values are best protected by staying in Europe.
Yes, and that is a view held by a lot of the Labour MPs. We're in a minority, but we're not a minority in Labour voters and Labour supporters in the country. This thing about rights at work, you know, Labour changed its policy to support the EU some time back when Margaret Thatcher was in power because they thought that was the only way they were going to protect workers' rights. In fact, the Labour governments and indeed Conservative governments have improved the rights. We are much better on many of the issues than we are in the European Union, and every single one of the rights that we've got are enshrined in British law. So if we vote to leave, there's going to be nothing will change unless a government gets elected, and then they want to change it.
What will change is that there'll be fewer people in work, Kate. That's the problem. Leaving the single market makes it harder for us to do business.
How do other countries trade with the EU and not in this? America trades with the European Union. They don't open their borders. They don't, have all these political structures. No one's against trade. Why do we have to have a political overtone to it?
The bottom line
Why can't we just trade?
Being inside the single market essentially means our British companies have a level playing field. But they'd still have to have all the same regulations.
How do you feel about being on the same side as political opponents?
Well, I think this is an issue that has people on different sides in all parties. And therefore, it's just one of those unique issues that bring people together.
I don't mind at all. I've said I'll appear on platforms with anyone within reason, and I think it's great. I find out this is really revitalising politics. And I think after the referendum, whatever happens, and I hope we're going to leave, there will be a change in the political sort of feeling in the country.
Are you not worried about it being a little bit too testosterone fuelled, too aggressive?
Well, we're both women, so are we getting too cross?
There's a lot of angriness out there, isn't there, in the crossfire?
But there's a lot of angriness out there when you get outside the Westminster bubble, and when you get outside London, people are very, very different attitudes to the European Union. I know we're going to talk about why it's different in London.
I think it would have been naive to have a referendum and not expect people to be on different sides of the argument. I mean, and passionate about it. This is the most important question facing our country. I think the key is making sure that whatever the result is on the 23rd of June, that we stick to that. That will be the result. They won't be coming back to it, but then we get back on as a government, in my case, running the country.
Let's pause for a moment. And before we go any further, let's see what businesses in the capital think about the great European debate and why London appears keener on Europe than the rest of the country. The familiar sounds of a building site, hammers, drills and foreign languages. These Lithuanians renovating a house in Tooting are just the latest wave of migrants to call London home. The plumbers and plasterers, carpenters and decorators have been hired by a loft conversion company which has around 300 Eastern Europeans on its books at any time.
My business has thrived, being connected with people who've come from different nations across Europe, particularly the Lithuanian guys. So obviously for me, I think from a business perspective, it seems wise to stay in.
Are they cheaper?
No, they're not cheaper. No, not at all, really. I think the main reason for using the guys is the teamwork and the quality of their work.
In a basement on Brick Lane in London's East End, a chef is cooking up a curry. But there's a shortage of staff in Britain's curry houses. Some estimates suggest 20,000 cooks and waiters are needed. Celebrity chef Ollie Khan wants Britain to leave the EU so he and fellow restaurant owners can recruit more staff from South Asia.
A lot of the curry houses are closing every day. And I think it is important for the industry that we should get the proper chef. That we do have a lot of Eastern European working in the curry industry, but they're not passionate about the curries because they can't cook, and that's why the problem. And also the problem is the language barrier. So I think we need somebody actually who knows his curry and he can cook better for the British people.
This week, a YouGov opinion poll for the Evening Standard suggested 57% of Londoners were in favour of remaining in the EU. So why is London more pro-Europe than other parts of the UK? Could it be because more than a third of Londoners were born abroad?
Well, I think there's a paradox throughout the country that the areas which have the fewest immigrants tend to be the most hostile to immigrants. London has been used for centuries to accommodating immigrants. Londoners feel at ease with immigrants.
The new migrants from Europe might play an increasingly important role in London's economy, but most don't get to vote in the referendum. Now, as we saw there, the YouGov poll for the Evening Standard shows London is far more pro-Europe than the UK as a whole, where polls show the two sides neck and neck. To delve a little deeper into those poll findings, we're joined by Joe Twyman of YouGov. Joe, how different is London to the rest of the country?
Well, in many ways it is different. Demographically, it's full of more young people, it's full of more middle-class people, it's full of more people who went to university, and it's full of more ethnic minorities. And all these are groups within the society as a whole that tend to favour Remain. And so it's perhaps not a surprise that along with areas like Scotland and Northern Ireland, London is far more in favour than the rest of the country.
Were you surprised that even Leave campaigners are slightly worried about what might happen if we come out?
No, it doesn't surprise me. It strikes me that the entire contest is now about my uncertainty is bigger than your uncertainty. My fear could have your fear in a fight, etc., etc. I think and I would like to hope that a positive message will emerge over the next few days, and that London will form an important part of that. And it's really vital to the Remain campaign that happens, because they need to get young people and Labour supporters to turn out if they're going to be victorious.
And surprisingly, your findings that Sadiq Khan's more trusted than the governor of the Bank of England.
Well, very few people are particularly well trusted in this instance, and to say, for instance, that Boris Johnson or Sadiq Khan is well trusted on the issue of the EU is like saying they're the tallest of Snow White's housemates. It's good, but it's not overwhelmingly successful.
Kate, are you depressed by the findings of this poll?
No, because actually I found a lot of what I call bashful Brexiters. A lot of people in metropolitan areas, particularly people from middle class, as you were talking about there, they don't quite like to admit that they're going to vote Leave. Seriously, there is a real issue in London. In London, yes. And also, I was very encouraged by the numbers of young Afro-Caribbeans that I met at the weekend in my own constituency, who were quite clear. They understood that the immigration, what would happen if we left, is we would have a fair immigration system that would allow their relatives from other parts of the world that are not in the EU to have not to be discriminated against, and that is a hugely important issue for a lot of the Asian community, for our African friends, and for Afro-Caribbeans. So I'm actually not
Justine,
too worried about that poll.
If Joe's poll findings are correct, you can breathe a sigh of relief in London.
Well, I think we want to do as well as we can, but I mean, for me, the issues are pretty straightforward. It's around jobs, it's around influence, and I think, for me, in my role as International Development Secretary, you fix some of the big challenges that we face in our world by working together as countries, and you've got to bear in mind that all of the big institutions, the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, and indeed the European Union, all of them came out of a period following the Second World War, and the answer of leaders to what they went through, and this city's very worst time in the Second World War, what people who were running our country concluded was that actually the way that the world needed to work was by working together, and that's again why I think.
Are you scaremongering again?
Leaving Europe would be the worst thing we can do at the moment. We would still be
members of NATO. We would still be have a veto at the United Nations. Is this why this idea that the EU is this hugely important international institution? It's not. It's shrinking.
I think
its market is shrinking every month practically in terms of what they sell abroad.
I think all I'm saying is that in terms of whether it's tackling Ebola, whether it's dealing with the Syrian
internationally, that's a global.
If I can just finish, dealing with the Syrian refugee crisis, whether it's actually the EU response to Putin's aggression in Ukraine, Britain's a sensible, strong voice around the table, and it makes sense for us to work with our nearest countries, our neighbouring countries, to try and have a constructive approach to the broader challenges our world faces. It's another reason why we should stay around the table.
Why can't we do that without being shackled in the EU? Why can't we do that and work with our friends, as we will continue to do if we leave? We've got America's relationship with us is not going to change one iota.
The reality is that the meetings where often a European position is taken and decided is at the European Union.
And then
that's
they don't
just
carry
a
it
fact.
out. We saw that happening over some of the refugee situations.
Do any of you suspect that tactical voting might play a part
Kate.
in this? Are you worried about tactical voting? People who see this as a chance to give David Cameron a good kicking?
No, I certainly, in my community, talking to my own constituents, I think people understand that this is the most important vote of their lives. They want to find out about the issue so that they can work their own views out, and then I think they will vote incredibly responsibly.
Could be tempting though, Joe, couldn't it, for people who feel that last year they didn't get the election result they wanted?
Absolutely. I mean, the Leave campaign, part of its strategy is, to my mind, to neutralise the economic argument. Not to win it, but simply to sow enough doubt so that then the entire referendum could be seen as a free hit, if you like. If you don't like immigration, if you don't like the EU, or if you don't like the Cohen government or the political institutions and the politicians generally, it could be seen as an anti-establishment move. And if there are perceived to be no economic impacts, then why wouldn't you do that? That's at least the
Isn't that a happy bit of fallout for you?
I think that is actually what is happening when you pick up and hear from people. You know, people in inverted commas, ordinary people feel that for years they've not been listened to, that they've been ignored, and that here the establishment and all the elites are all joining up together to say, you don't know what you're talking about, we're telling you should say. And I just think that this is a time when people in the end will vote on their instinct, on the feeling they have about the destiny of their country, and that's why I think you do a great job, but I'm not too worried about opinion polls at this stage.
Justine, briefly, make the case for London.
Well, London is the financial centre not just of Europe but of the world. Staying in the EU makes us the gateway to Europe, and for many companies investing in the UK, London is that place where they start. So this is about jobs, and it's about protecting jobs and protecting London's position. But also, it's about protecting the fact that London is the most amazing international city I've ever been to and that I live in, and actually it shows that we're best and we're strongest when we're part of the wide world. But that starts with our own neighbourhood of Europe. We have to stay in the European Union because it's a geographical fact that Europe's our continent and we should be part of it shaping it.
Kate, how can you be certain that London won't be damaged if we come out?
Oh,
You
I'm
can't,
very
can
certain.
you?
I'm as certain as I can be that it will be not damaged, just as I can't say I'm not certain that it won't be damaged if we stay in the EU. Look what's happening to the single currency at the moment, and whether we're in the single currency or not, we are going to be affected by the downturn and the changes that happen there, and then we end up paying the bills because we have to as part of that EU, whether we're in the single currency or not. So I think London is, yes, it's the capital city, it's the most wonderful city in the world, but we're internationalists, and it is.
Do you concede that London has done very well out of being in the EU?
Well, I think that London would have done very well even if we hadn't been in the EU. Let's forget all this. Remember the scare stories, as I've said again and again and again. It was the City of London was going to disappear if we didn't join the single currency.
Can I just ask Joe?
And that's just been nonsense.
Can we go back to the last time, 75?
75.
The
yeah.
polls.
I wasn't born. No.
How were the polls then?
Well, the polls for weeks and months before the referendum itself showed Leave ahead, and yet when it came down to it, as it has done in 23 of the past 34 similar referendum, Remain pulled ahead, and indeed won by 2-1 in the end.
That won't happen this time.
Well, it would be interesting to see what happens if London votes to stay in, Scotland votes to stay in, Wales votes to stay in, Northern Ireland votes to stay in, but the rest of England drives the whole of the UK out.
I just wanted to pick you up in Northern Ireland because I've been over there a lot, and Northern Ireland is not going to vote by a big majority, if any majority, to stay in. It's just nonsense. The same with Wales. They've dropped saying about Wales
Joe,
now because
just quickly, in a word, put money on it, stay or go.
If I had to put money, I'd say that we'd stay, but it's by no means guaranteed.
Lovely, thank you very much. Right, a little later than usual, I'm going to have to draw this discussion to a close. Thank you to all my guests tonight, to Justine, Kate and Joe, and thank you for watching. I'll be back with the Late Debate next month to pick up the political pieces of the fallout from the most important vote in a generation. Until then, from all of us here in the studio, good night.